Well, hey everyone, Mr. Harper here again, and we are going to start a brand new unit, plant roots. So let's jump right in. You see a plant and you see the top part of it. You see the stems and you see the leaves, and you know the roots are underground, but how big are the roots? Well, on many plants, roots are quite sizable. A rye plant, which you can see a rye here, this picture is a grass. Here's a picture of just the kernel. These are all cereal grains. Oats and rice and wheat and barley and millet, oat and maize. These are all types of grains, and rye is a grain. So a single rye plant they took and looked at just one plant. They looked at the roots area, and with the little tiny, all the little small roots, it had an astonishing amount of roots, 412 miles worth of roots, which was way larger than its stems and leaves, and many plants are like that. The number, the size, and the length of roots below ground are much larger than what you see above ground in many plants. So let's think about these roots. So you plant a seed, and out of that seed it sprouts. It's called germination. It puts out its roots first, though. So here's this seed. First thing that grows out of the seed when the seed hull splits open is the root, and then out comes the shoot, the stem and the leaves. And so inside of the seed is some food supply, and the plant draws on that food supply to make this root and this stem and these leaves, and the plant has to have enough food supply in the seed for it to reach the surface and put out its leaves to begin to do photosynthesis and make energy from the sunlight. If the seed is planted too deep, the plant will never reach the surface before it runs out of food inside the seed, and it will die. But the root immediately begins to draw on a couple of things to help the seed to grow: water and minerals. We talked about those nutrients, minerals, nitrogen and phosphorus and sulfur and magnesium and molybdenum, all those kinds of things. So there are two main kinds of roots that plants have. Some plants have tap roots. And here's a plant with a taproot. One big root and then many smaller roots coming off of that. But the big root is very big, and it tends to be straight down. A good example of a plant with a taproot is a carrot. One big root and many smaller roots off of that. Many times the carrot, the smaller roots are so small that you can't even hardly see them in comparison to that big carrot. Or a dandelion has a taproot. Or another good one is a thistle. Now, a different kind of plant root system is a fibrous root system. In fibrous roots, all of the roots tend to be roughly the same size. Some are bigger than others, but not by much. And they're mostly the same size, and fibrous roots compared to taproot tend to grow horizontal, much more horizontal than they are vertical. They do grow vertical too, but a lot of horizontal growth. So those are the two main kinds of root systems: taproots system, fibrous root system. So let's take a look inside the root and talk about the pieces of the root, what it's made out of. Now, as I start this discussion, I want to refer you back to the last unit. We talked about plant organs: leaves, stems, and roots. So a root is an organ. And organs, remember, are made of tissues. A bunch of tissues working together to do some kind of a job become an organ. So there are three kinds of tissues we talked about in the last unit: dermal tissue, vascular tissue, ground tissue. So let's talk about the tissues that a plant is made out of. The outside covering of a root is dermal tissue. Here's the epidermis. You learned on the last unit, epidermis is a single layer of cells that covers and does some protection of whatever it covers. In this case, it is a root. So you can look and you can see in this particular root, there's dermal tissue, there's vascular tissue, there's ground tissue, because every part of the plant has all three kinds of tissues. So the root does, stems do, leaves do. So you can see here the dermal tissue is this covering, and then there is ground tissue. It's here around this area. And then in the center in color is actually the vascular tissue. We'll talk about all three kinds. So first, The epidermis has two functions. First is protection. The second is absorption. The epidermis has to allow for water and for nutrients and minerals to be pulled in. The epidermis has all these little small root hairs coming off of it. Very, very, very small roots. And they help to do a couple of things. First, they extend through the soil, help loosen the soil as they do, but they provide for a larger surface area for the absorption to occur. Think about this. If it was just a flat area, this would be the only area that could absorb water and nutrients. But you've got this area, plus you've got all of the outside area of each one of these extensions, these little tiny root hairs. So it helps to provide a larger surface area. These root hairs do. Now, just inside the epidermis, there's an area called the ground tissue. So this ground tissue is actually called the cortex. Here it is in gray. All of this area, even down through the apical meristem area, is all cortex. So once water and minerals are absorbed into the epidermis, they go into the cortex, and they move through the cortex, and they go into this vascular area. So the cortex helps to function in transportation, but the cortex also stores food that the plant has made, the products of photosynthesis, such as a starch, which is a type of carbohydrate. So think of this. All summer long, a tree is busy doing photosynthesis, and it uses the products of that photosynthesis, which are sugars, and sugars combined together make these things called starches. It uses the products of the photosynthesis for two things. One, it uses them to live. So all the things the plant needs to do to live, they use the food that they make to live, just like we use the food we eat to live, for our energy, for the plant's energy. But the plant, if it's a tree growing here in, say, Ohio, it has a problem. And that is when wintertime comes, its leaves drop off. So it can't do photosynthesis. So how does the tree stay alive? Well, the tree's got a solution for that. It uses the extra energy. It takes the extra energy that it makes, and it doesn't need to live because it's making more energy than it needs, and it sends it down the stem into the roots, and that energy is stored in the roots in the form of starches. Starches are just big complex sugar molecules. You can think of it like a bunch of sugar molecules combined together. And then that food will stay stored in the roots in this cortex area, and then it will be drawn back up, and the plant uses it to live through the winter, and then it uses it to make the new leaves in the spring. We'll talk more about that. Now, there's also a layer of ground tissue here called the endodermis. It's a single layer of cells. It goes all the way around this center area, which is the vascular tissue. This center area is called the vascular cylinder. And this endodermis is really important for how water and nutrients get into this vascular cylinder. So here's the vascular cylinder here in orange and yellows and a little bit of greens. And then this orange layer here on the outside, this is the endodermis. So we have an epidermis that covers a single layer of cells, and then we have an endodermis. So this endo, it's a single layer of cells also. So this dermis is like a single layer of cell things. The epi means it's on the outside. The endo means it's on the inside. It surrounds this area called the vascular cylinder. We only show a part of it here, but it goes all the way around. And if you imagine if this thing was not cut in half, this vascular cylinder would continue around like this, and it would be a total circle. At the bottom of the root, toward the bottom, there is an area here called the apical meristem. This apical meristem is where the root is growing really, really, really quickly. So these cells in the apical meristem are dividing and dividing and dividing and making new cells, so the root's growing longer here. Below the apical meristem is this area called the root cap. The root cap is really made of really, really, really tough cells that protect the root as it grows, because this area back here, these new little baby cells, are very tender, like little babies. So they have to be protected by this root cap. Additionally, the root cap makes this slippery, greasy, oily kind of a substance that helps the root to be pushed through the soil as it grows. New cells are constantly replacing these tough cells on the outside because they get scraped away as the root grows. This is all part of ground tissue. And next we'll get into root function. So we are going to stop right there. We'll talk more about roots next time.